Today's episode is part of this series of Casey Jourdan discussion. You returned to Casey Jourdan part 2 to unfold this eightfold path, the Casey Jourdan eightfold path.
Yeah.
That's the misnomer. She doesn't call it that.
No, we call it that. We call it that, yeah. But the first interview was so powerful. And then just at the end, she drops this, boom, I've got this podcast, The Pursuit of Evolution. I have this, I never know what she calls it, but I call it the eightfold path, these kind of 8 rules of life. And I was like, whoa. And then I wanted to get into it, but I realized it'd be a whole other show. So then we did a whole other show.
And the first episode, for those of you that haven't heard that, you should go back and listen to that, because that's Casey Jourdan's story, which is so inspiring and so informative.
And a beautiful harmony of like what I'm always trying to promote, which is that our purpose, the seeds of our purpose, are contained throughout our lives, even in the stuff we wish never happened to us.
And in Casey's case, probably more so than many of us, she had such depth to mind in that, such challenge. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's what I thought maybe we'll go through each one and we can kind of take it apart, and maybe you can give me your take on how this either applies to you. Maybe I can offer some of the ways that I think I could integrate some of these steps. But the first 3 are just sort of these mindset frames, right? And let's just review them again. The first one is embracing your own story, and I can tell that's massively important to Casey. That I would say that's like sort of the foundation of maybe it's the first one, but it feels like it's a starting point for how she's organized herself in relation to all of this.
Yeah. And I think it's also just kind of a first principle of, you could call it personal development or just accepting reality that like our story is our story. It's happened. Most of it has happened in the past. A small fraction of it is happening in the present. And if we don't, it's really kind of what is the word? Like a fantastical thinking, or this illusion that we can do anything but embrace it. But yet most of us are in that space so much of the time of like, oh, I wish this didn't happen. Oh, I'm ashamed of this. I feel guilt about this. Or it's like, that shit happened.
Yeah. The way you're articulating that really clarifies this for me, because I think there's so many ways you could tell your story, right? And there could be all kinds of different sides to a narrative. But what I hear you saying, the real takeaway, or the essential aspect of this, is a real acceptance of life as it is, and sort of your personal history as it is, without kind of rejecting anything or sweeping anything under the rug, without ignoring anything, without leaving anything out, but to really take a full deep look at your personal history and accept it as it is, without any fantasies about changing it. You just said maybe like magical thinking of sort of wishing it away.
Because we can't. And so full disclosure for the listeners, Nate. So first of all, I love Nate.
Feelings totally mutual.
Thank you. Second of all, Nate does not live near me. I live in Seattle. Nate lives in New York. And third of all, Nate came out here to the West Coast and we hung out yesterday.
That's also true. And now we're not together.
We're not together.
Because I left your home in the beautiful at the base of the Olympic National Forest, where we did some hiking yesterday, and drove back here to Seattle.
Yeah. And on that hike, the reason I bring that up is that reference part of the conversation we had yesterday, which was about the unicorn thing.
Tell me more. Remind me. We talked about a lot of stuff yesterday.
Yeah, we did. And we actually talked about unicorns at various times throughout the day. But the unicorn thing for me is, there's this t-shirt that I saw that says, always be yourself unless you can be a unicorn. And in that case, be a unicorn. So it's a little tongue in cheek, but the idea is just like, we can only be ourselves. And to me, that's what she's referencing there, is like, we have so much power if we just accept that we can only be ourselves. And then all of that energy and mental process, and even just kind of emotional drive that we normally use to wishing we're someone else, we can use that to like just start with where we are and then be able to learn and grow and evolve and integrate with all of the understanding of our flaws and our complexity and our trauma and the fact that we didn't have the experiences that other people wished we had, or that we even wish we had. Like, someone who didn't get into the grad school they wished to get into. That happened. And we could carry that around, or it could be like, well, I had these other experiences. I have these other gifts. I have these other perspectives. It's different from that other fantastical person in my mind, but that's not the life I lived. Like, I lived this life here.
So the way you're explaining this to me, Ankur, really aligns to, I think, something that I hold as a first principle. Maybe I just say it a different way, but I always say to myself, reality is a potent ally.
Whew. I've never heard you say that. I like that.
I say it in one of our videos in Momentum Lab. You have to watch that Momentum Lab TV episode. So I think this is perfect. This aligns perfectly with a very deep belief of mine. Or sometimes I'll say reality is my religion. And I think this is like really gives us so much when we're able to sense and accept the sensations and the feelings and emotions that come up from really facing something. I think as we move through this list, we'll see that this actually kind of comes back in different ways in the way Casey orients as well.
Yeah.
So let's move on. So the second one is also a mindset frame. And she's saying there's no one right way to do life, which to me is sort of like the permissive or the supportive side of the same thing. Is that?
Yeah.
You're saying it is what it is. And then the second frame says, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can still be okay. Yeah. Yeah. It can still be okay.
Yeah.
And I think this is so, to me, this is like, I'm imagining a camera lens, you're like turning the camera lens, like old school style, and things that are blurry get into focus, and things that were in focus get blurry when you do that. And if you're focusing on exactly specific outcomes, like, oh, I wanted a blue car, or, oh, I wanted a certain degree, or, oh, I wanted a partner with blonde hair, or whatever. Like, you might not always end up with those things, but things can still be okay. You can still be happy. Yeah. You can still contribute. You can still express yourself creatively. You can still have your fundamental needs met. Yeah. Your need for connection, your need for movement, your need for transport, your need for autonomy. Those needs can be met even if the specific objects of our fantasy are not achieved.
Yeah, really. In a sense, I think this item is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't add much to that because I think you just nailed it. But I love that it's so far they're working in these pairs. You embrace your story, you accept reality as it is, and the second frame says it's sort of like the horizon is open to pursue and figure things out and problem solve in infinite number of ways. Essentially, there's no one way to do it. So yes, some of those options may be off the table now. Right? I think it's too late for me to become pickleball champion of the world. I'm sorry to say that.
You're a pretty athletic guy.
Just because of my other priorities. I just know that I'm just not going to have time and that's okay. So, and the third frame, I feel it's still somehow in this flavor. But I really appreciate this one. It's actually one of the presuppositions of the Feldenkrais method, actually, which is to embrace your strengths and balance your weaknesses. And there's actually a sign in the men's bathroom stall at the Feldenkrais Institute. So I often have occasion to read this sign and when I'm in a very contemplative space. And it says, it's a quote from Moshe Feldenkrais. It's a person that uses their strengths. Literally, it's almost exactly the same thing. A person that uses their strengths to integrate their weakness. It actually uses the word integrate, so that to include the weaknesses is a whole person. And man, I really resonate with that. I really resonate with that because this idea of integration, like I think in Casey's case, she's already kind of building this argument to help herself and help anyone who's listening to this and she's sharing it with. There's an acceptance there, and then a process of discovery, sort of what's your niche, right? I can just see how applicable this could all be to anyone in our program, any of the people that we work with that are really on a path to discover sort of mastery within a domain or develop themselves along a certain line within a certain business or skill. And the step one of acceptance of reality, the step two of understanding that you have this individual path and whatever has happened is perfect, and that there's this multitude of ways you can approach. And this third one of saying, I have these specific skills based on my past experience, and I can actually leverage those to integrate and embrace and accept my weaknesses.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole lot of self-love and self-acceptance and self-esteem that is built into that statement. And I love that. Those are some of the things that I'm most passionate about rooting for. And I had a call a couple of weeks ago with a potential client. So I do this call, this kind of exercise of creating insight on the phone that is honestly one of my favorite things to do, because you get to know someone so deeply. And this person who I'd never met, but after 20 minutes of talking to them, I could feel their beauty, their commitment, their integrity, some of the challenges they've faced in their life. I asked this question about their strengths. What do they acknowledge as their strengths? Kind of very, very similar in the vein of this third principle of Casey's. And she wasn't able to say anything. And I knew, even though I had not known her very long, but I knew by that point that there were a lot of strengths that I could already identify in her. And the fact that she couldn't, to me, it just broke my heart. Because I think it's key to what this whole project Casey's talking about. Her movement, her podcast is called The Pursuit of Evolution. It's very similar to what we're talking about all the time, being our best self in order to contribute to the whole. I think that we have to be able to see how we're valuable.
Well, it's interesting to me. It's sort of this middle path, right? Of kind of one way to develop or to work on something, just kind of whip yourself like a stubborn donkey. Kind of this model of this maybe self-violence or, get your shit together, kind of the tough love approach with yourself, minus the love. And then, maybe on the other side, it's just, hey, don't worry about it. Just chill out. Hakuna Matata. Have a pina colada. Yeah. But this is a really subtle, skillful way to work with it. It's a commitment, like you just said, her movement has evolution as its sort of central theme or focus. So it's very focused on this forward developmental model, but you're working a little more skillfully with yourself, and I really appreciate that, because I think whatever your opinion about kind of that the tough love continuum, from my experience and what I can perceive, it's so much more efficient to do it this way. Like, why fight yourself and create all these entanglements with all that, the mental energy and resistance and all that, when what I hear you saying is that you can create a foundation of understanding, recognizing your strengths, and then that's a leverage point, right? That gives you kind of the coherence and wherewithal then to approach your weaknesses.
Yeah. And like Casey says, to balance them. We're not denying that we have weaknesses, but we're like, hey, well, how do I address these weaknesses? Through my strengths.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think that's pretty clear. So the next four are more, Casey says, they're more action oriented. Again, I think they sort of come back to some of these mindset frames, but maybe in a more instructive way of how you proceed. So the first one is baby steps, and maybe we could put that in the language. We talk about chunking something down to the smallest meaningful step forward. To me, this is pretty self-explanatory, but what more can you say about that?
Just that it goes along with this of positive reinforcement thing that we're talking about, number 3, of like, have the tasks be small enough that it's easy to succeed, because you're cultivating a positive feedback loop of success. And so if I like try and be like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to do no advertising and I'm going to have 1 million listeners by the end of the year, it's really, it's definitely not a baby step. And when I don't have 500,000 listeners 6 months into it, it's very easy to get discouraged, you know, and really like I think the key maybe implied insight there is that the number one thing that makes the difference between success and failure in a larger project is our own sense of attitude and energy. Like if we like lose interest, lose hope, lose inspiration, lose consistency, we're dead in the water. The most important asset is our own ability to continue doing on it, which is it's like a purely psychological thing.
Yeah. And I think this is pretty well, this isn't a very controversial point at this point. You have James Clear's work, BJ Fogg, but this idea of really understanding the next step kind of on this atomic level, like in the case of Atomic Habits, but really the next step forward so that, like what I hear you saying is, you know, just to set an outcome goal that's way out there, you got this kind of stretch goal that's, you know, this target out there that is ambitious. Just to go from 0 to 100 like that without being able to picture the steps. I think one thing that you said absolutely correct, that kind of managing your own staying power on the task is really fundamental to your success. But it's also like knowing what to do, right? Like being able to articulate like the next thing to do. Like if you just say to yourself, go get 100,000 listeners, can't try anything there. But if I say, you know, you come up with some ideas about what to actually do about that, then there's something you could do tomorrow.
Yeah. Concrete experiments you can run.
Yeah. So next one, gosh, where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4. We're on number 5 already. And this is also sort of an instructive thing you can do about some of the mindset frames. And I can tell this is very important to Casey, but it's boundaries. She just says boundaries but it's setting boundaries. It's creating boundaries. It's enforcing boundaries. Am I right? I imagine. But practicing good boundaries with your relationships. Why do you think that? I can infer a lot from your conversation with Casey, why that was so important to her in kind of her recovery and addressing some of the trauma to really create a clear, stable container of her own agency, right? And, you know, the example from the first episode where she like is actually telling her partner exactly how to deal with her when she's having this kind of PTSD panic attack. But it's, you know, it's not just the thing that I think is great about this whole list and this whole conversation with Casey is that this thing and this method and this approach or this, you know, way that she's developed was really forged in fire of her experiences. So in a sense, it's been really field tested. Right? She knows this works in an extreme case. And I think then we can say, wow, even I haven't had extreme experiences. Like I've never been in war, right? I've never, you know, I haven't had the same experiences she had, but I can see how it's super valuable for me and I can trust it because she's sort of tested it in this extreme situation.
Yeah, I think there's like a deep connection between that boundaries and safety, giving us the safety to then express ourselves creatively and act creatively. And I'm actually thinking of yesterday in our hike, in our conversation, you had a line about bearing the disappointment of others that I found really, really moving. I wonder if you just share about that a little bit.
You know, we were talking about sort of our relationships with our own mothers and this capacity to be able to withstand the feeling, the sensation of upsetting an attachment figure. Someone so important as your mother. You developed this bond when you were really fragile and vulnerable. And this tendency to always please and keep this person feeling okay. Right. And how that can extend to so many relationships in our life. And this sort of you said it really wonderfully yesterday, actually. I think you clarified it because it's not to tune out. It's not to be insensitive to a person's experience, but this capacity to be available and aware of what someone's going to, and be able to bear that feeling of this person is upset or displeased or disappointed with me. And that's okay. That's my boundary. and to operate from that center of power and strength and agency, actually then we're more available to actually help people, to actually be of service or a resource to people because we're resourced. So I think if that's how you meant it, I think those are the boundaries, right? You're saying this is the boundary. Whatever you're going through, I have compassion, I respect it, but that's your experience. And I'm only going to accept so much responsibility for modulating that for you.
Yeah. I mean, we can't always live up to other people's expectations. And if we try, we often end up just losing our center. And then instead of becoming our own creative impulse moving through the world, we're just like randomly like bouncing off and reacting to other people's desires.
Well, you say this too. Maybe we're departing a little bit from the idea of boundaries, but when you talk about like really articulating a vision or having a clear idea about what you're doing, what your objective is, then you're less susceptible to buying into someone else's, kind of becoming a bit player
totally
in their vision.
Yeah.
Right. Which, like, I think you say, it's like, it's never a great role that you get cast in when you're in someone else's.
Yeah.
You never get the lead.
Right. Exactly. And that's part of like going back to like 10,000 Heroes, you know, we're redefining heroism as like defining or discovering our purpose and living it and contributing to the whole. So that's part of what we're doing. But we're also referencing superheroes and heroism and mythology. And I think that's like the beautiful part of the mythology, our inheritance, is that these heroes they really are the lead in their life. I see like that's what we're here to do, is find a way to like use our strengths, which are our superpowers, and become like the lead in whatever it is we want to create.
Well, when you say it that way, I really see how Casey's whole system then is just like this perfect expression of that essential point, basically. So we've been developing that since the beginning, which is the beginning of this discussion, that is accepting your own story, right? So it's like right there. It's like you're centering yourself as the center of this compass, and kind of all of these other frames and the other kind of instructive actions in this eightfold path of Casey's really support that, right? It's just you are first centering yourself in what's important to you, your own story, your own objectives. And then in this step, we're really kind of enforcing that or protecting that in a way that requires us to show a little strength or bear some of the challenges in a way that, in my experience and listening to Casey, gives us the power to actually then pursue those baby steps or those objectives that we're after. Yeah? Cool. All right. So, and then this one, again, maybe in that same realm of, I could frame both of these steps as more assertive, more challenging, but in this step, she's saying to face it again and again. I think this one's worth unpacking a bit because, in Casey's case, again, it's like this really extreme event in her life that is coming up again and again in all these different scenarios. So the facing it is, I can tell, an important part of it, kind of back to accepting reality. But I think the operative part of this step is again and again. So, how many times do I have to encounter this situation with my father and accept it? Endlessly. All the times. I think we talked about something yesterday where you said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't, I'm repeating this. I'm telling you this again." And it was like some very core part of your life and your orientation is of course, we're going to talk about that again and again. We're friends. And this is a really essential part of your experience and your story. So it makes sense that we would keep discussing it in these different phases of our growth and our development and our relationship, right? So I think the again and again thing is really, really, I'm just curious. How do you relate to that? Because to me, that's really the operative part here.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's, the whole thing, evolution. It's an infinite game. And so any expectations we have that it's going to be finite or like, oh, I did that. Like the truly hard work, the spiritual work, the self-development work, the self-reflection, the self-love, the acceptance, the compassion, the forgiveness, all that stuff. It's just like a constant, all the words that come to mind are these like, antagonistic metaphors, struggle, battle. That's not, I don't think that's actually how I see it or how I want to see it. It's like a constant game, and we keep on developing or playing. I think it's more like it's like a dance that never ends.
Well, that certainly helps bring us back to that kind of the skillful framing of that, or like using the strengths to balance the weaknesses. So like having this idea that it's a game, or there's something at play here, or there's a contest sort of with our own ego and mind and feelings. And, when you're put in the context of a spiritual pursuit, sometimes I think of like in meditation, that like my mind is just this wonderful sparring partner, and then to really be grateful for that. Because wow, like it's so adept. It's always one step ahead of me. I think I'm going to need some help with this next one because it's not necessarily intuitive to me.
Is this the quit? Is this the quit everything one?
Always be quitting, or quit more things.
This is, I want this to be your experiment.
All right, I'll quit everything. Moving to Bali. Okay, I think if I frame it as sort of the iterative mentality, and that aligns really wonderfully with kind of the way we talk. But I don't want to just smash it into a frame that I understand. But is that what you think it is? It's like try more things, get the feedback faster, and leave it if it's not working or if it's not what you're after. If you're not, it's not. Yeah.
No, I think it's hard because, like you said, we have a lot of pre-existing notions about this, and it's kind of hard for me to like get beyond my own to see what Casey's really going for here. I think what Casey's talking about is cultivating a lack of ego. Like, you try something, it doesn't work, or you don't like it, or rather than shoving yourself into a mold and doing it because a previous incarnation of yourself thought it'd be a good idea, feel free to just be true to like who you are at this moment. Be like, oh, that's not what I want to do. Yeah. In my mind, like when I think quit more things, I think focus, man. Like, why are you doing so many things? Which I think there's a value to that, but I don't think that's exactly what she's saying.
Yeah. I think my resistance to accepting it, I don't know that I would put it on my list in that way, is, of course we get halfway through some process, some goal that we've set for ourselves. And that part of the journey sucks. It's boring. It's tedious. I got to do a ton of work. And, for me, there's really, that's maybe the essential fulcrum of any process for me, is kind of staying through that elongated, protracted middle, where you don't have the excitement of starting something. And I want this to not be that, I don't think Casey's saying give up when things get hard. Right. So I think there's a lot of sensitivity. Like we really would have to, in order for this item to make this work for me with that language, I would really have to remind myself and bring all of these other kind of frames and steps up to this point. That I know I'm using all of this skill to integrate and be really sensitive to whether or not I've put myself and actually done that work of creating the boundaries and bearing and all that. Like I'm not doing something to please someone else. There's not a compulsive sort of process here to like, I think I ought to or should be, but that I'm really in pursuit of something that's authentic and important to me.
So let's go back to the context. So for Casey, this came about in her whole journey with infertility treatments. And part of that journey, the mantra in that world, which I haven't spent time in, but the mantra is never give up. Like you're going to keep doing these treatments and you're going to keep dedicating to it until you get the child. And she and her partner were like part of that. And then at some point she was like, no. Like, it's okay to stop this because it's not working for us. It's not actually giving me what I want in terms of my life holistically. So I'm going to feel free, even though I'm part of this subculture where the point is just keep doing it, to be like, no, this is not actually no longer what is going to work for me.
So it really was all of those things. It was a sensitivity to her own story, her own experience of pursuing this thing, and then enforcing these boundaries on her own sense making. There's this like kind of like meme or there's just like this imperative that's been pushed through this subculture to her. I think not even in subcultures, in popular culture. Like there's so many opportunities for us to like say, hey, wait, no, I'm not doing that. Right. That's a really powerful thing. So that actually, thank you. Because that makes it very clear for me. It's just to be able to walk away from something that's not serving you and actually just to say no, thank you to whatever the forced sort of imposed frame might be.
Beautiful. No, thank you.
No, thank you. And the last one is kind of maybe the perfect thing to lift the spiral out. And, part of going back to why she's chosen evolution is such a central part, what she's trying to communicate. And that's to never stop learning and growing. And I love that as kind of the cap because then it frames everything. I think maybe a listener that's, trying to make sense of this with us, there's in some of these earlier frames, it's like, is this too loud? Like this last one, for example, it took us some time to unpack that. There's a real balance here in Casey's orientation that kind of on one hand has mercy, to put it kind of in the old, like Christian, there's like mercy and judgment, right? And these two hands where you have like the support and the care, you're going to take care of yourself and you have like the wisdom to keep going. So it's this to me, to never stop learning and growing is the ultimate sort of pointing that she's included here. And it makes everything make sense in a really sharp way. So all of this, all of her steps and frames are really to support a constant and to put it, I think you said evolution is an infinite game, right? So it's to always be looking for that next edge.
Yeah, totally. 100%. It's balance, right? It's the balance of the support and the challenge.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to accept your challenge or not. I'm going to take on this homework what would it be? To find something to quit? Look for something that just is no longer serving me and I can just stop doing. Well, thank you all for going on this little journey with us. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out the previous discussion with Casey and be inspired by Casey's journey and story of hardship and overcoming some pretty amazing challenges and setbacks. Thanks for hanging out, man. This is fun.
I love it.
All right, folks. We'll talk to you next time.
That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. Thanks again for listening. And I hope that this has contributed in some small way to your own personal journey of heroism. I'd like to give a shout out to Pierre for the episode artwork, DJ Plainview for the theme music, and to our producer-editor, Martine. This podcast is sponsored by Momentum Lab, our year-long coaching program providing insight, accountability, a community of excellence, and one-on-one support. I encourage anyone who's intrigued to go to whatismomentumlab.com and explore. Finally, I love communication. If this episode has impacted your life in any way, let me know. Our email is info@10kh.show, and there's other ways to contact us in the show notes. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and take care.